exquisite, and that you all felt moments of transformation and renewal and joy. It can be exhausting now that the holidays are over to kind of like look at what just happened and say, I can't believe for 6 weeks we were like utzing about all the food that we had to prepare. Even the break fast has, food to prepare. So don't think that Yom Kippur is a day off. It's like a day on, even more so. So with all of that kind of like, in reflection, because it's very proximate to our experience, I'm just hoping that you all feel a renewed sense of learning. And welcome back to our learning, because it's been a month. And just to sort of bring us back into focus about our class, the overarching goal of the course is for us to understand not simply the political ramifications of the conflict that exists in the region, but also I think it's really about developing an understanding, not only with terms and definitions, but with knowledge about what really does define Israel, what really defines the Palestinian people, and their aspirations to have a national homeland for themselves. What really defines the identity of Zionism and anti-Zionism, and what really qualifies as those things, and how it just is in distinction with anti-Semitism, which is sometimes conflated, but also does have two unique interpretations of the sort of sentiment in opposition to the state of Israel, the Jewish people altogether as a people. And knowing that that exists, and it's so harrowing. If anybody knows about, like, you've all seen the stuff about Kanye West, which was just awful. And then also, in my local neighborhood, there was a big posting about somebody that dropped off this thing and said that the COVID pandemic was all run by Jews. Because if you go down, you maybe saw this, so you run down the list of who are all the directors of the institutions that bring healing, that have, like, responded to the pandemic, have been Jewish people. And so it's just awful that that's out there, and that exists. And I'm also hopeful, just on that note, and then also in our definitions, that there is an equal and sometimes even more vocal voice of support and solidarity that is being heard. And it's just awful that we live as a people with that kind of attitude and behavior that's just looming in the background of our lives, and it doesn't go away. And if we're talking about peace and tranquility, we as a people, we have found peace and tranquility, but just knowing that these things are always there. There's no day there's no day yet in which it hasn't existed. It's highly likely that it won't go away anytime soon. And while it might be quieter, which some could argue is sort of how it is right now, it's never fully disappeared. So the goal of this class is not to say, like, how are we going to solve the problem so that everybody is going to live happily ever after, but how do we have the conversation so that when we're talking with people, not only can it be educational, but also we can grow from it. It's an interesting kind of thing. Perhaps it's a normalization of what it is that we're talking about. That the tension that exists between the dynamics of the evolution of the Jewish people as a civilization and other cultures and communities in the world isn't something to be overcome, but is actually something to be perennially contended with. And what does it mean to be situated in that place? And the reason that I frame that question, or those series of questions, in our learning is because we're going to be spending the bulk of our time focused on two main articles that I brought to you. And I mentioned that in the review. And one comes from Aleph Bet Yehoshua. So AB Yehoshua actually stands for Avram Gabriel Yehoshua. And you're like, wait a minute, shouldn't that be AG? Well, no, because Israelis have nicknames. The nickname for Yehoshua, by the way, is Shuki. I don't know why. Somebody calls me Shuki every once in a while, and I feel like if they're calling me Shuki, they don't know who I am, but I get it, right? Or like sometimes like the nickname for David is Doo-doo. And which is kind of funny for us because doo-doo has sort of a strange connotation in the English language, but in Israel it's just a nickname for David, right? And all of the other ones that kind of come along, which we could spend the next half hour talking about the nicknames. But Gabriel has the nickname of Bully, as in Gabriel, the Bet Lamed sound. Billy, right? So his name is Avram Bully Yehoshua. And anyways, he's an extraordinary writer. He was a playwright. He became kind of a political figure, and he represents, a more progressive and liberal bent, often critical of the more right wing and conservative factions of the Israeli government, but also when it comes to questions about what is termed the occupation and the relationship between the Israeli people and the Palestinian people. It's sometimes very difficult to sort of navigate through his thinking, because you might hear things that sort of make it sound like he is not in support of the Israeli government. And nothing could be further from the truth. He's actually situated in a very, very interesting place, which is that he recognizes that there may be some elements in the sort of formation of the nation of Israel, the nationalist impulse that established the state of Israel, that there was suffering, there was exile, there was a refugee problem that came as a result from the inhabitants that are there, which we're going to talk about today. And then also he is critical, this is the part that I think it's important to hear, he's critical of the Palestinian leadership from a political perspective, and noting that terrorism and some of the sort of, like triage attitudes, severe, almost like amputation style kinds of responses to the conflict that exists in the region, by going to like the International Criminal Court per se, or going to the UN and like forcing all of this condemnation, is also not necessarily valid and appropriate. So that's a really interesting kind of point that we're going to deal with over the next couple weeks. And just, we're going to let his article kind of guide us, because he also really defines a very, very, very important question, which is, who is an Israeli? Has anybody read this article before I bring it up on the screen? Has anybody met A.B. Yehoshua before I introduced him to you today? Okay, so what I recommend is that I read one of his books, and I'm so honored because in 1995 he received the Israel Prize, which is the like highest achievement of a writer or an artist in Israel. And then in 1996, when I graduated from Brandeis University, he was given an honorary doctorate there. So I had the privilege of like actually like seeing him and hearing from him in person. It was pretty awesome. And then in graduate school, I read the book called The Lover, which is a really, really interesting book. It's a very good read. So if you go look on his Wikipedia page, it'll tell you that one of his popular books is called Mr. Money. But then I also recommend The Lover. It's just a beautiful kind of like fictional book set in the Israeli landscape. If you're liking to read some, good Israeli fiction, I highly recommend him. He is among the other great thinkers and writers of that generation. Amos Oz, David Grossman. These are other people that you would meet in the Israeli literature scene who have great insights into Israel culture and life. So here's the article, and let's get to know. Let's hope that this is it. Can you guys see this all right? Yes? Okay. I'm going to make it bigger. All right. So now, before we get into the articles, I wanted to bring a piece from the Tishbe book called Israel. And I just love it because we're talking about us and them. We're trying to define, okay, well, why do we have to have a definition of, us and them at all? And why is it that there's, such an acute distinction between Israelis and Palestinians? And is that a real distinction, or is that an arbitrary distinction because, Israelis are Jews and Palestinians are Arabs? And is it really just is it an ethnic distinction, or is there something more? So, Sassy, you want to read? Because you're on the top of my screen playing with the camera. You got to unmute yourself one more time.
But hey, you might be saying, if you know your scriptures, what about the ancient Philistines from the Bible? The Hebrews took their land first, right? Well, yes, but the Philistines from the Bible no longer exist. And there is no relation between the biblical Philistines and today's Palestinians. Archaeological DNA testing of the remains of the Philistines indicates that they migrated from Europe, and archaeological writings from that time point to an indecipherable non-Syro-Arabian language, meaning not regional, not Arabic, Amharic, Hebrew, Aramaic, or Assyrian. Furthermore, in terms of religion, Islam wasn't around until centuries later.
Very nice. So the first thing in this conversation is that if you're talking with people and like there's already this impulse that like, oh, the Jewish people have been like taking the land of the Palestinians for millennia because look, there in the Bible are the Philistines and Philistine and Palestinian, and when the Romans come and conquer the area, they call it Palestina, right? So like the idea that it had this sort of like attachment to another people, and that the later the Jewish people, and then ultimately the Israeli, the state of Israel is just taking away land from other people is completely false. Okay, yes, there were other people living on the land. Yes, we have in the Torah that it says that we're going to be casting out the Palestinians, the Canaanites, and the Amorites, and the Jebusites, and the Girgashites, and all these other tribal entities that existed in the time of the Bible, because there is this sort of like statement that these tribes were a part of the land, and God wanted to set the land for the Jewish people, if you will, or the children of Israel, and exile these people out. And while there's plenty of conversation about what really is going on there, and whether or not it was about a casting out, or whether Abraham was there before and then these people took it over, all of that stuff could be a wonderful, glorious conversation about something that's probably not even quite historical in and of itself. And what you should walk away from is if somebody tells you that the Palestinian people were there first, it's just not true. It's just not true. Right? It's not true because there's DNA evidence. It's not true because there's cultural evidence. It's not true because there's historical evidence. All the things that would make an attachment to those people living at that land before there was any settlement of Jewish people ever is completely patently false. Okay? That's what Tishby points out. So it doesn't mean that you would talk to your friend and be like, well, you're wrong, right? But I think that it's an opportunity for you to understand what's the starting point. Where do you start the conversation? You can't start the conversation from the Bible when it comes to the conflict or understanding the distinction between the peoples that currently dwell in this small New Jersey-sized strip of land known as the State of Israel. You can't. That includes us, and that includes our cousins and neighbors. Any questions or responses to that? Just to keep that in mind. Okay, all right, great. Audrey and or Sherry, let's start in our article from A.B. Yoshua, defining who is an Israeli. Who would like to read?
Okay, you want to start? You want me to start? Defining who is an Israeli. A.B. Yoshua. Every answer to such a question has two different parts, the citizenship part and the identity part, which do not necessarily overlap. For example, my nephew was born in the US to parents who were there as emissaries. He automatically got American citizenship, which requires the most minimal of efforts to maintain. But his identity is clearly Israeli and not American. If I would describe him as an American because of a second passport, he would be offended and protest. A Pakistani who arrived yesterday at London's Heathrow Airport and has British citizenship that he inherited from his father or grandfather is British, even if he doesn't know a word of English and has never heard of Shakespeare or Byron. His British citizenship gives him all the same rights and obligations as the British Prime Minister, yet he has a completely different identity. Nowadays, citizenship and identity are not identical. It's true that the vast majority of people who have a particular national identity are citizens of that nation, but many millions of other people around the world, among them many Jews, are citizens of a particular nation, yet see their national identity as something completely different.
Very nice. So hold on, let me pause it right there, and I'm taking it off the screen because I actually think that this is crucial. So, in the United States, in 2008, the country elected its first Black president, Barack Obama. And there was a reaction to it, right? Right? There was a terrible reaction. The birther movement and all that other stuff. I mean, some could argue that the political rise of Donald Trump was in part due to his reaction of his distaste for Barack Obama. I don't know if it was on the color of his skin or if it was on his politics. I'm going to assume that it's on his politics. But here's the thing that was undeniable. There was nothing that would have prevented Barack Obama from becoming president. It's topical because just yesterday we heard the news of the next prime minister of Britain, who has an impeccable English accent, but his parents are Indian. I believe they're Indian, right? His parents are Indian, and he has Indian cultural ethnic heritage, but he is a British citizen. There is nothing that prevents him from being the prime minister at the highest levels of leadership because of his citizenship. Shift it to Israel, because we're going to talk about this. If you are a Palestinian and you have Israeli citizenship, you can become prime minister. Now, there's questions about the sort of cultural, social things, which is why I brought up Barack Obama. And we talk a little bit even about I'm sorry, his name is escaping me. I'm not an expert in it yet, but the new prime minister in England, and the very concept that different cultural backgrounds have something that can be considered, thumbs on the scales of like marginalization and also like diminution of their status because they're considered a minority, but they have the same capacity and rights and opportunities to become the highest leaders in the land if they are elected as such, because that's what it means to be a part of a representative democracy, which is what we have in Israel. So it's important that when we start about defining who's an Israeli, like what we're talking about is, on the one hand, it's about being a citizen. I'll tell you that this is actually a really important piece. And I'll say my comment and then we'll continue reading on. In the news today, there was you guys know that elections are happening in Israel right now? Okay, it's kind of upsetting because it's the 5th election in 4 years, right? It's really, and I'm kind of upset. I mean, I can reserve my thoughts about Bibi Netanyahu, good and bad, for a different conversation. But Benjamin Netanyahu has the potential to become prime minister again, right? He already is the longest serving prime minister in the history of the state of Israel. And it's quite possible that he could become prime minister again, even after all of those legal issues that he was in, that got him out of the job in the first place. Go figure. The issue that is not about Benjamin Netanyahu, but it's about the turnout of the Israeli Arabs, and these are citizens of Israel. So if you go to the predominantly Israeli Arab populated cities, okay, throughout the country, and you ask who, and they did ask, who are you going to vote for? There was a lot of apathy. Part of it, the apathy is just, how many times can you elect a prime minister 5 times in 4 years, right? It's annoying. The other part of it is that there's a feeling that these are marginalized groups, even though the representation of the Israeli Arab parties has increased over the recent years. So when we're talking about citizenship, it should never be a part of the conversation that that there are citizens of Israel who are Palestinian, which, by the way, constitutes about 2 million of the 9 million, 2 million of the 9 million citizens, okay? 20% and growing. It's a minority, but it's a growing minority that it should be more equally represented. And that's certainly possible. One last point on it, because it'll come up in the article, if you haven't heard, there are Palestinian-born Israelis who sit on the Supreme Court. They have the right to imprison the president of the state of Israel. And in some cases, we're sitting on the court that had to adjudicate that in previous presidents. How could you possibly say that this is an apartheid state when that exists? Is that clear? Right? That does not happen in apartheid states ever. Okay? So it doesn't mean there aren't complications. I'm not minimizing it. I think we need to be very clear about our definitions. That is not one part of a definition of what qualifies as an apartheid state, among other things. Any thoughts? Audrey?
And maybe we talked about this when I wasn't here, but have we talked about like that there were actually no Palestinian people, that they were Jordanians?
No, we have not talked about that, and we're going to come up to that. That's going to come into our conversation today, because there is sort of an element of when we come to define who is a Palestinian. All right, that's what we're doing today, and it's going to be very helpful for us. Okay, because it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's also, you know, when we're talking about citizenship, you're correct to say that if there was a nation that the people who lived in the state of Israel, the land of Israel, before the establishment of the state, and they were citizens of somewhere, they would have been citizens of Jordan, which was already a country recognized by the United Nations by that time. Barbara.
I guess I just feel that the I don't know if it's publicity is the right word, but the ability to know all this information, let's say even on a college campus, to be able to speak up and say it isn't an apartheid state because, and we don't have the ammunition, terrible word, to speak back and say, no, it isn't, and here's why, and shut it down. We don't. We're very bad at like defending ourselves and even promoting ourselves meaning Israelis or Israel in general, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I feel like we're really, really bad at this.
Mm-hmm.
We need much better PR. I'm quoting Suzanne.
Oh.
I mean, all the years that we have been learning together, Suzanne has said, Israel has terrible PR. And then when you read Noah Tisby's Israel, you kind of want to nominate her for head of PR because she really has points that say Israel does exist and speaks them clearly.
I think it's very important, and Lauren, I saw your hand and I'll come back. It's very important that the reason that we signed up for this class is to overcome the fact that we're ill-informed. Okay, the fact that there is a different body of information out there, and that it's actually, you know, just look at Berkeley Law School, okay, and know that exists. So that's a real, you know, that's a real factor, and there's definitely work that needs to be done. I will add that there's a part of this that's emotional. And who is actually doing the teaching is not so great sometimes on both sides, right? And so because there's an emotional dimension to this, and we're just trying to get to facts on the ground, right? Because you can't really have a conversation unless you have, you know, at least mutually agreed upon facts. You could disagree about the response to the facts, but you have to have the facts, right? So in order for us to get to the facts, we need to have the information. So that's a little bit about what we're doing today. Lauren, Roberta S., and then we'll see what's next. Okay.
I don't know if it was in this class, but everybody is so opinionated about Israel, more so than like so many other countries. You know, it's like everybody has what Israel should be doing, what Israel shouldn't be doing, like Israel should be perfect. And, you know, we're so hard on Israel sometimes, more so than any other country, I think. You know, like we have the answer, we don't have the answer. And we don't know the situation, we're not there. So it just seems we're very hard on what's going on and what's not going on, because we don't live on the daily struggle of what's going on in Israel.
Yeah, I think that's a good part. And I would say, like, just to add that other layer. So just even think about the stuff that's going on in Russia and the stuff that's going on in the Ukraine. We only get what we get. First of all, we get anything. So that's a big piece. But the problem is, the more knowledge, the more pain, right? So we have just enough knowledge for it to be painful. And that's part of the issue, is that sometimes the information that we're getting is very narrow and limited. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that, like, it's like, you know, have you seen those pictures? Like, if you look at a picture up close, right? Like, look, this is my face, right? But as soon as you open it up, I'm in my house, right? That's exactly the same kind of thing. So you might see, if you only saw me like in this, you might think that I'm in a box, right? But I am in a box, but I just happen to also have, like, you know, lots of room to walk around in that box. Roberta S., you had your hand up? You gotta unmute. Gotta unmute.
Yeah.
Oh, do it again. Sorry. My fault. There you go.
No. Okay. So throughout years and years, you hear about presidents in the United States and all these important political people talking about the need or not the need for Palestinian statehood. And after listening to what you just said, it seems to be much more complicated, that it isn't just they're there and we're here, that there are Palestinians in Israel, 2 million of them, you said. So why are they so, they don't seem to know about this? You know, why is Palestinian statehood not acknowledging that this actually exists in Israel, when they say, oh, it's got to be one way or the other way? Does that make sense?
I'm a little confused. Go.
Okay, well, you said there are Palestinians in Israel, 2 million, right? And it's not black and white that Israel is that Palestinians and Israel were, well, Palestinian is a separate state. It's nothing now, but when presidents talk about it, it's like, we need a Palestinian state or we don't need it. But they don't acknowledge that it's not all black and white, that they're
100%.
Palestinians here now.
Right, exactly. So
Do they not know it, or do they just ignore it?
no, oh, now I see what you're saying. So it's, I mean, that's a really good question. So I think that I really think that we're scratching on a very, very big issue that actually transcends this particular topic and really spills into every other topic that we're talking about. And it's important that when so I would say, in short, your job, yours and all of our job, is to be as informed and as knowledgeable as we could possibly be. Right? And your job by taking a class like this is that whenever you have the opportunity to educate people and to speak about it, that's an important thing to do. And to do it with, as we've always talked about it, to do it with dignity and with respect, that's a very, very important thing to accomplish. Okay? Now, when politicians are using that, the us or them, this is a great thing. So look, the name of this class is Us and Them, right? And we're going to talk about the political ramifications of that in our next class, okay? So today we're going to stay focused on the historical aspects of it and the definitions of it, but then we're going to talk about the political ramifications. I'll just answer your point very quickly. I think it's easier for people to understand either ors.
Yeah.
That's it.
Presidents of the United States?
All the more so. All the more so. Okay, Jay.
Addressing the PR aspect of all of this, maybe our PR isn't great, but even if it was great, I think this really comes down to that anti-Semitism trumps everything. Because if you make a list of the good and bad of Israel and the good and bad of Muslims or terrorists. You know, I mean, their PR, they blow up our buildings, they blow up planes, we spend billions of dollars on Olympic security that could go to feeding people. We stand online for 2 hours at the airport. Their PR is horrible if you're making a list of what they do and what we do. But anti-Jew hatred, Jewish hatred is just so strong and overpowering. It doesn't matter what they do, or even if our PR is somewhat better.
So,
Anti-Semitism trumps all, in my opinion.
thank you
How
for
bad do they have? How much worse do they have to be for people to sympathize with Jews?
Yeah. Well, I think it's complicated as well. It's not just about like, well, when will the world start finally liking Jews, right? It's actually that, like I said in the introduction, where we live in a place like we are situated as a people to constantly be in tension with the rest of culture. Okay, and for good and bad, right? We're sort of, Western civilization's conscience, and consciousness, as well as we are sometimes Western civilization's victims. And there's something just so beautiful, profound, harrowing about Jewish identity that has carried this identity throughout the millennia. So for us to be sitting in a class and talking about this, which is, by the way, right, like there isn't a whole lot of classes in other sort of academies that talk about this subject. It's not like there is another class at Birzeit University in the Palestinian territories where they're talking about this conflict. I mean, I would say in general, right, maybe there are particular people that are saying, let's understand the Jewish perspective here. And I think that there is part of an issue of us, we carry the mantle of responsibility to educate both sides of the equation. That sometimes means that we have to endure the hatred, the vitriol, the violence that comes as a result. And I think our hope is that we will prevail by continuing to march forward with, our dignity, our respect, our responsibility. Yes, billions of dollars in security, but what else are we going to do? Millions of dollars in a wall. What else are we going to do? Because when we didn't have a wall, the Jewish people, the Israelis were dying. And it's not just the Jews. There were Palestinians that were dying, let alone the one that took their own lives. There's a real problem here in the, as you're saying, there is a real problem in the mechanisms of attention. And because those mechanisms have often manifest in violent means to be paid attention to, that there's a sense of oppression and it hasn't resolved itself otherwise, is an intractable problem on both sides. It's on both sides, right? It's not like but this is the Golda Meir, right? This is the Golda Meir quote, right? We pray for the day when they love us more than they hate us.
Children, or they love their children more than they hate us.
Yeah. So knowing that that's kind of like something that we need to pray for is where we're at right now. In the meantime, we've got stuff to learn. Yes.
So
Lauren.
I like this whole thing with the Kanye issue. Like, do you think giving it more attention brings more attention? Bad attention? Like people see these signs and they agree with the sign. I mean, it's like this catch-22 almost, isn't it? Or should everyone be outraged? Should everyone in America be outraged? Should all these celebrities be outraged? Should the president come out and say something? Or should we ignore? I mean, it's like this. I don't know how I feel about it.
You're right. I would say like there's a sense, and I need Alice because Alice is our voice of moral conscience here. She's like screaming from the rooftops and she's like, everybody needs to be yelling about this is horrible. Let's stop it right now, right? That's Alice, right? Which, by the way, right on. I cheer you. That's not necessarily my approach, but you need to exist in the world to do that. However, there is something kind of like problematic for all of us if we're constantly screaming and nobody's listening.
Right. And say, Kanye's right. Kanye's right. Kanye, there's people are going to say Kanye's right, you know.
Or it's like just let it be ignored, right? And those are really problematic things too, right? Like imagine 1933 in Germany, and there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And where were the people that should have been screaming from the rooftops then? And look at what happened as a result, because they didn't. So there's that, right? And then there's this other part that says like, how bad is it really, right? Were the frogs in the water, right? As the heat is slowly turned up, we don't even know that it's boiling. Barbara, you did that to me directly. I don't know if you wanted to do that to everybody. Did you want that from me just directly? Barbara sent me something directly that I'm sure she would reframe a little bit more diplomatically, but she's like, maybe we need a birthright for all the people that don't understand Israel. Wasn't that a nice way for me to say what you just said? Yeah, that's good. All right, Jay, last comment, and then let's read a little more. By the way, we only got one paragraph into this article. It's 6 pages, people.
I was just at the airport. Oh, did I? Yeah, I was just at the airport, and when we're going through security, for an hour and a half, and I just felt like yelling out, "Don't you people realize that we're standing and doing this because of terrorists?" But of course, I didn't yell that out. But number two, about Kanye, the reaction has sort of challenged my assumptions that Jews are the only people in the world where you can say these things about, and no one cares. Actually, a lot of people, the response has been pretty great, I think. A lot of celebrities and companies have dropped in. They've really been, speaking out against him, and I'm happily surprised by the reaction.
Yes, and I think so, Lauren, and in another response to your comment, right? The other side of it is there's a ton of outrage.
Yeah, there is.
Right? And it's not just Jews. That's the point, right? So something is different. Something is different. Thank you, Jay, for bringing it up. Alice.
I was just going to, in agreement with Jay, the fact that we have been screaming and yelling, everybody's screaming and yelling, that companies are reacting, that Adidas finally said, we're done with him, we're pulling the line, and he's never going to get any more money. It took a lot of yelling. It didn't happen immediately. It was one after another, yelling at the top of their lungs. And I believe strongly that if we don't do that, we're going to end up in Nazi Germany.
So, right, in other words, if we cannot, so we have to learn how to do it better. If you ask my answer to that, we got to figure out how to do it better. And the thing that we're doing in our class, folks, is we're figuring out how to do it better, because there's a lot of stuff. And when you talk to people and they tell you one thing or another, like just think about that apartheid, conversation. So you want to go up on, you're walking on a college campus and they're like, Israel's an apartheid state. And you want to say, no, that's not right. Well, you have to be informed with the right knowledge in which to do that, right? You have to understand why they were thinking that was a term, because they might be just flinging the term because somebody fed it to them. They might actually believe it. And either way, you have to be prepared to sort of navigate that. My dear friends, Sherry, Audrey, one of you want to keep on reading?
Sure. No, wait, am I mute? We're on.
We're good.
Okay. Understanding, is that where I was starting?
Yep.
Okay. Understanding the difference between identity and citizenship is the cornerstone to answering the question, who is an Israeli? In terms of citizenship, everyone who has an Israeli identity card is Israeli. Under the rules of democracy, all are meant to have equal rights. But not all of the people identify as Israelis. 1.5 million Palestinians with Israeli citizenship will generally identify as Palestinians. They are considered, it scrolls down, hear me out. They are considered a national minority living in their homeland among a majority of a different nationality. Such a situation in which a national minority lives among a majority of a different nationality is very common in today's world. You will find it in Europe, Asia, and Africa. In that respect, Palestinian Israelis are no different from other national minorities, like the Basques, the Kurds, or the
Quebecois.
Goodbye, close. Is that, I'm not sure, but
Quebecois.
okay, Quebecois. But we must remember that Palestinian Israeli is not a territorial minority. As far as he's concerned, all of Palestine and all Israeli territory is his homeland. Thus, territorial autonomy in the Galilee or a concentration of Arab Israeli towns. I know as the triangle, for example, is meaningless.
Wait, hold on. Just to go back to that sentence.
Yeah.
Thus, territorial autonomy in the Galilee or in the concentration of Arab Israeli towns known as the triangle, for example.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Just the inflection was important.
Yeah, no, it was, and I wasn't following it actually. There is only cultural autonomy. There is, of course, a bidirectional flow between many of the elements of the national identity of the majority and the citizenship of the minority, and vice versa. The Jewish identity of French Jews is heavily influenced by their French citizenship. It is possible the French identity is somewhat influenced by the Jewish national identity. Same is true in Israel. Palestinian identity of Israelis, Palestinian citizens contain components of the general Israeli identity, including through the Hebrew language, and it also works to shape that identity. When an Arab Israeli judge presides in a case against the president of Israel, or when an Arab Israeli hospital director establishes new hospitalization procedures, they are creating Israeli codes that are at the heart of Israeli identity. The same way an American Jewish Supreme Court justice can be a partner in interpreting the US Constitution.
Okay, wonderful. It's a great place to pause. And I think just to sort of like digest what it is that we're saying, I think we're very clear but about what citizenship is. And just sort of, there's two things to recognize. One is that being a citizen of Israel means that you have all the rights and responsibilities to even serve as a Supreme Court justice and adjudicate against the president of Israel, right? Or to establish, and I thought this is like magnificent. You're telling me that somebody who is an Arab, a Palestinian, who simultaneously the people as a national identity believe that all of the inhabitants need to be Palestinian and not Israeli, right? And are part of the nation, have the authority to determine the hospitalization protocols which confirm the health and vitality of the people, the citizenship. You're telling me that if they have that power, that why wouldn't they use that to turn it against Israel? If that's what the true attitude is. You guys understand that? That's a very, very important piece of the puzzle here. It makes you, when you're talking about them, it's not just them. It's not just all Palestinians. And just to be mindful, it's not all Israelis. How do we know it's not all Israelis? Because Israeli culture is totally different than American Jewish culture. Oh boy, is it. And if you've ever, how many of you, you've all been to Israel? Everybody been to Israel, at least, or seen Israel enough? Okay, good. So you know that all of this stuff that you see on the news, Lauren, right? Especially like all the stuff that you see on the news, where it's like, all of this like Palestinian strife and IDF soldiers killing, armed resistant fighters and all that other stuff, right? For the most part, and I mean this, the most part, there is commercial activity happening really positively. And it's not just simply that the Palestinians are serving coffee in the hotels, even though that might be the case largely, and it feels like that. But if you if you look at members of the Knesset, people that serve in the government, setting laws for the way that the people are going to govern themselves, and they have Israeli Arabs as well, or if you will, like Israeli citizens who have Arab descent, that's also true. So when you're having the conversation with people, it's very important to start dissolving the us and them lines that exist. The coarsening that Roberta was wondering about, right? It's the moment that we get coarse about who is the definition of us and them is the moment that we lose the reality, okay? Any responses, additions to that? Are y'all feeling good?
Sure. Yeah. How many of these Arab Palestinians live amongst
Israelis?
Yeah.
No, so Israeli Arabs?
Arab Israelis, maybe?
Yeah, the Israeli Arabs, there's about 2 million.
Right, but
Right, that's
how
the,
many live in the the two settlements, or do they live amongst each other?
No, so let's be clear. We're going to talk about this later when we come to the Palestinians. Maybe we should have done who's a Palestinian first. But like, just to give you an answer, right? There's about 13 to 14 million Palestinians in the world. Guess about how many Jews there are in the world, right? About the same, go figure. Okay, so in the Palestinian territories, and in particular in Israel itself, there's about, I want to say, I think there's like, I want to say 3 million in the Palestinian territories and 2 million in Israel, and then a remaining 7 to 9 million, or 7 to 8 million outside of Israel. They live in Jordan, they live in Syria, they live in Saudi Arabia, they live in Lebanon, right? In other countries. So that's kind of like where they live in the United States. Okay, there are Palestinian, right, Judy Mo, right? There's the television show. There are Palestinian communities in the United States as well. So when we're talking about right now, we're just talking about Israeli citizens who have Palestinian descent, right? There's about 2 million of that group of people.
So
Okay.
I think part of the question was like this triangle. So, I mean, I know there are Palestinian towns within Israel, same way there's, towns that are more Jewish or whatever in the US. But then there are also neighborhoods that are just interspersed, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you go in Israel, right, so geographically in Israel, where does the Palestinian population live? They live primarily in Jerusalem, in that area called the Triangle, which is near Tzfat and the sort of Sea of Galilee. That's a lot of the original sort of areas. There's also very large concentration of the Palestinian or Israeli Arab population in the area near Lod, which is near the airport, Ben Gurion Airport. It's also where the border is, and so there's families that were separated by the border, and then there's also a very large population in the northern desert, like Beersheba area, okay, around there. Those are the primary population centers of the Israeli Arab communities. Tel Aviv, of course, right, and all of that. Jay.
The Palestinians who live in Israel, we're learning, have the same rights as other Israelis. The Palestinians who live in Lebanon or Jordan, do they have the same rights as Jordanians? And
that's an interesting question. I don't have like hard data information. I'm gonna hear a little bit about Jordanian. So the Palestinians that live in Jordan that are not Jordanian citizens, they're not citizens. They're refugees of Jordan. If they're Jordanian citizens, they get all of the rights of being Jordanian citizens. If they're Lebanese citizens, they'll get all the rights of being Lebanese citizens, okay? So if they're citizens, but there's another issue, and especially a regional issue, okay, where you got a lot of identity that isn't necessarily nationalistic. It's tribal, familial, okay? It's a good question. It's a good question as well. Did I answer everything? We're good? Yes, Audrey.
I was always under the impression that a lot of that refugee status was maintained, even though it's been a very long time, kind of as a way to make sure that they remained identified with themselves as Palestinian refugees and not granting them citizenships, particularly in Jordan.
Yeah, it's a really complicated thing, and I'm gonna save that for our next week.
Okay.
So we'll talk about the refugee status. We'll talk about the UN refugee, the UNRWA, the sort of organization that treats the Palestinian refugees, and then also continues to provide United Nations resources to the tune of billions of dollars, and the fact that the refugee number has grown significantly, right? So because there is a certain classification that exists with that. Okay. It's like better to be a refugee than nothing at all. Alice, you want to read a little bit?
Still, identity versus citizenship. Still, there is a difference between identity and citizenship. Who better than the Jews have repeatedly proved this throughout their history in many parts of the world? Therefore, the term Israeli does not touch only upon the common citizenship of Jews and Arabs in Israel, but is a concept of identity in and of itself. Even if there wasn't a single Palestinian Arab in the state of Israel, the state is called Israel, and thus its people are Israelis and not Jews. The state is Israeli and not Jewish. After all, Israel was the original, I lost my place.
Sorry, original name of the
You
Jewish
moved
people.
it, and where are we? Thus its
Wow.
people are Israeli and not down there. It
Yeah.
appears for the first time during a period of exile in the context of Mordecai the Jew, who lived in Shushan, the capital of Persia, and who brought his niece to King Ahasuerus, allowing her to intermarry. If Moses, King David, and the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Samuel were to visit the Knesset and be asked by its speaker, "Who are you, gentlemen? Please identify yourselves," they would undoubtedly reply, "We are Israel," or "We are from the children of Israel." And if the surprised Knesset speaker would press the point by asking, "Are you Jewish, Yehudim?" they would answer, "We don't know what you mean by Yehudi. Do you mean someone from the tribe of Judah or something else?" The word Yehudi doesn't appear in the Jewish prayer book even once, and the sages of the Mishnah insisted on using only the term Israel and not the term Yehudi. According to tradition, the name Israel was bestowed by God himself. That's why the territory associated with the people is called the Land of Israel. Israeli universities teach Mashevet, Israel, Jewish philosophy, the history of the people of Israel, the literature of the people of Israel, and of course, the name of the state is Israel. So one wonders what happened over the past 20 to 30 years to repeatedly turn the words Yehudi, Yehudit, Jewishness, and Medina Yehudit, Jewish state, into identity indicators for Israelis, relegating the word Israeli to some corner for civil purposes alone. Is it possible that a Spaniard living in Madrid will see his Spanishness as merely a civilian common denominator between him and the Basques or the Catalans, and not a deeply rooted identity that stands on its own?
Thank you. Okay, I know that was a lot of piece.
That
So
was a lot.
what's that? No, it's a really good thing. So what was this next piece? Is going back to the question of identity versus citizenship. And just to keep it in context, right? So who is an Israeli? I would summarize what Alice just read in a very, very succinct manner by saying an Israeli doesn't mean a Jew, period. That was the point. And he was trying to show us that if you looked in the time when Jew was being used, even Mordecai it's in the beginning of the book of Esther, it says Mordecai ha-Yehudi. And at that moment, he's not even a Jew. It means that he's a member of the exiled people that dwelled in that land called Judah and or Israel. Okay? That it was a term of citizenship. I want to qualify something because I discovered this recently. It's sort of, I think, a really profound contribution to this conversation. The Bible does actually begin referring to the people as Jews, not as Judeans, not as Yehudit, but as in the word it's Yehudaye. They are a term of a people, not a citizenship, a people, a cultural people, all the way in the book of Ezra. Now, if anybody knows anything about your biblical literature, Ezra is the scribe who is writing about the people returning from exile in Babylonia. In other words, he is the one who first understands when he's recording who are the people that are going back to that place that they were exiled from. They're not just tribal citizens of an exiled country. They're a people. They have a culture. They have a unique identity. They have a language. They have a set of spiritual practices that is unique and distinct from any other place on the world. Therefore, they need to go back to their home because that's where they're going to do all their unique cultural stuff. That cultural stuff never got fully integrated into Babylonian ways of life. Okay? Roberta P.
Why then do people refer to Israel as the Jewish state of Israel? Isn't that the crux of the problem then?
So that is a huge problem once we get advanced to whether or not Israel should be a Jewish state or not. Okay, and we're going to discuss that once we get a little bit later in our class because it's a big, huge thing right on the forefront of everybody's mind. And I want you all to sort of feel, again, by the end of this class, you're going to know what it means when that conversation is happening, being flung around like a hot topic. I think it's actually not helpful for us to have these things as hot topics, but they can't not be hot topics because there's a presumption that the people that are looking at this stuff know all the things that are necessary in order to make a judgment or to take that new knowledge into context. Did that make sense what I just said? You guys get what I'm saying? Sort of? Let me say it again. Okay, this is in no way a diminishment of anybody's knowledge. I'm telling you, I had to go to rabbinical school and I had to live with this stuff for 20 years to begin to understand it. Let alone to part of my ability to even teach it was me being able to frame it in a context to understand it. There is stuff that is part of the sort of common daily conversations about Israel, about the Palestinian people, about identity, about citizenship, all of these things that are being discussed here that presume you knew everything that led up to that. So if somebody is going to tell you that the state of Israel should be a Jewish state, how do you make that decision? What qualifies that? How do you know that unless you understand that there is there would be some benefit or detriment to that? By the way, Roberta P., there are both sides that are in opposition to that. To say that the moment that we call it a Jewish state fundamentally denies the sort of national identity of Israel. There are millions of people who are not Jewish in Israel. Do they need to be citizens of a Jewish state in order to be members of that state? So some would say, yes, look, Jewish laws, it's a good thing. And then others would be like, no, because there's that sense of Jewishness, which in effect, right, it undermines or devalues or disregards the unique ethnic and cultural identity of a portion of its citizenship. It's a really great point. Okay? All right. How about we take a little break here and get some freshness, and we'll go through more of this. We just want to make sure everybody, are we okay? It's a good place to break. Let's take a break. It's 11:47. Let's come back in 5 minutes. Quite a bit. We're not going to get through the rest of this article. So take the article and read it. I'm going to skip a good chunk of it and just get us towards the last section because I want you to get a little feel. It's not like, it's such a wonderful article and I'm glad that we're reading it. And it's really worth sort of like digesting and unpacking it. You see how it sort of really evokes within us some bigger questions. But let's read a little bit of the end, and then I want us to get the other side of defining who is a Palestinian, because then I think, again, it'll help us when we talk next week to talk about the political understandings, right? Not for us to be, inflamed on either side, like when Israeli army does things that just, make us so upset, or when we hear about the Palestinians running to the United Nations and not talking to the Israelis directly, which, again, once we understand and peel away the politics, it's much more complex. It's much more interactive than it seems on the surface that we get from the news. Okay. All right. So this last piece is Israeli versus Jewish morality. And Judy S., do you want to read?
Page is that on?
8. Yeah.
Hold on. All at once, elements of life became open to the influence of Jewish identity and thus assumed an Israeli identity. Now a slew of new ethical questions that a Jew never dealt with and still needn't deal with in the diaspora pose challenges to the Israeli, who must make real life, practical decisions and not just analyze and interpret the issues as a course of study. What, for example, should an Israeli prison look like? How large are the cells? What are the imprisonment procedures? To what extent and how moral is it to torture dangerous or to obtain important information from him? Is one allowed to sell arms to an African country ruled by a despotic regime to prevent unemployment in the Israeli arms industry? National values are determined not by talk, but by action. It's easy for a rabbi at a Chicago synagogue to take Jewish morality out of its lovely etrog box on Shabbat, deliver a pleasant sermon about it to his congregants, and then return to the box. But in Israel, Jewish morality is sometimes determined by the angle at which a soldier holds a rifle while confronting a Palestinian demonstration in the territories. This morality is tested every day and every hour through 1,000 different acts. That's why today it's easier to be a Jew in the diaspora, because on the bigger questions, a diaspora Jew participates only as a citizen and sometimes a rather aloof one of another nationality.
Okay, pause right there, right? So I'll just give you like another case in point of an interesting test case. So there was another news article that came in the news today about condemnation against the Israeli military practice of removing a Palestinian like protester, not necessarily a terrorist, but a protester who was causing harm to Israeli citizens, and I think was hurt himself. And so they were moving him from the hospital to the legal system, the court system, but they marched him through the hospital with handcuffs on. Okay, so you would say like, oh my God, why couldn't you, so under normal circumstances, this is the reality. Under normal circumstances, the person wouldn't be paraded through the middle of the hospital because that's indignified, right? And it happened, right? So did it happen on purpose? Was it intentional? No, because there was correction that took place. What happened was wrong, but it happened. So here's the point that it happened, right? That we take away from it. It happens. This stuff happens all the time. But the moral standard that has been put upon Israeli society, or the Israeli national society, has a moral tone to it. The moral tone is what he's starting to talk about. In other words, it's fine that there is a place in the world called Israel, right? But like, what determines the unique national identity of Israel? And I use it very carefully, national versus cultural identity, because there really isn't, it's not so easy to separate it out. Think about it in this country. This is a major, major challenge in this country, especially right now. There's such an inflammation of national versus cultural identity. It is constantly in tension. You would say that like the question of abortion in this country is the nexus point of this problem that you see in Israel. The issue that he points out in this one paragraph is that for the rabbi in Chicago to pull out an etrog on Shabbat, which is a metaphor, to pull out Israeli behavior on Shabbat and say, look at what the Israelis do, and like, look at how wonderful it is, or to be like, look at how be critical, is completely, it is not completely, I suppose it is insincere at best, because it doesn't educate to the ultimate question, which is, how does Israel function as a national identity, and what happens when those national behaviors are in conflict with the moral foundations of Judaism? Where's Ruperta P? I think she had to jump off early. This is it. This is her, the same question that she brought up. She's like, is it a Jewish state? And who determines it? Well, this is the problem. This is the problem. Like, how do you say it's a Jewish state? Because if you do, then everything's got to be kosher, and everything's got to be observed on Shabbat, and everything's got to be according to the moral codes that are sustained by Jewish law. Well, how's that work for every other place in the world? Does it? It doesn't. And because it doesn't, the question is, should it in Israel? Let me pause right there. Because sometimes we feel when we're talking about Israel, it is our fantasy of the best of Judaism. That our visions of Israel is that, like, you go there to be the most Jewish. But the reality is that if you go to Israel, you go to experience what it means to be an Israeli. And to be an Israeli is not just Jewish. One more point on it, and anybody can respond. In 2005, there was one of the Gaza wars. And a great teacher in this country, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, penned a great article. It's one of my favorite articles. I go to it all the time. And basically, he says the responsibilities of Jewish power. So he says, the line is, to take on the tools of power is to take on responsibility. It's not just that Jews now have the capacity to protect themselves, but how we wield that gun, as A.B. Yoshua put it out, really is determined. Yes, it's informed by Jewish wisdom and insight, but it is a decision of the Israeli people, which means that Palestinians have a say in that too. Any comments? Yes, Pam.
So a little bit off the subject, but when I read just recently about the, I think $5 million that the yeshiva group in New York had, it just upsets me. And I don't think the standard should be different for Jews who live in Israel and Jews who live in America. But when something that big happens in a religious institution, not just by a Jewish person, it makes everything crazy for me.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what happened, maybe.
What's wrong?
I'm not sure what you're.
So in the news, what happened was today, a decision was handed down in the court system, basically finding a yeshiva, a Haredi yeshiva, guilty of improper use of like national funding. So they were getting money from the government to run their school, and then they were funneling the money into parties. So they were using it in their budget, but they weren't using it for educational purposes per se. So on one level, it's totally an administrative problem, right? This is the Donald Trump argument, by the way, right? Fraud happens all the time in businesses, but I'm being hunted down because it's political, right? Well, on the other side, it's like, no, you broke the effing law, right? You broke the law. There's not like everybody breaks the law, so I could break the law too, and you're just mad at me because you don't like my politics, right? But what Pam is bringing up is, this school broke the law. There are other schools that break the law all the time, but they got caught. Did they get caught because they were Jews and anti-Semites? No, but as Jews, we feel like it's a knife in our heart. That's what Pam is telling us, right? And then I would say, Pam, you know what? They're bad actors all across the human spectrum. Yeah. And shame on the school for using the money improperly. But especially, you know what?
When some of the money was supposed to be used to feed kids and, do good work. Exactly.
It just, whatever it was, is just, it's a shame, right? The fact that the shame exists is true. All right, so look, we are going to have to stop by 12:30. So I want us to move ahead to the next article because I want to get to the who is a Palestinian. It's a smaller article. Please read at your convenience. It's a very, very good article by A.B. Yoshua. I hope that you've enjoyed what we've read so far, and I want you to read the rest of it because we'll bring it back next week.
This is over at 12:30.
All right, and let's see. Jeannie, you want to read? You're going to start on page 11, if you want to.
The Palestinian people are an Arab ethno-nationalist group residing primarily in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, Israel, Jordan, and parts of the southern Lebanon and Syria. Significant Palestinian communities are located in other countries as well, including Saudi Arabia, the United States, excuse me, which is home to about 85,000 people of Palestinian descent, according to a 2013 US Census figure. There are roughly 13 million Palestinians in the world, according to the 2018 estimate from the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, the vast majority of whom are Sunni Muslims, though a significant minority is Christian. Nearly 5 million live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and another 1.9 million in Israel. The remaining population lives elsewhere, with the largest communities in Jordan, Lebanon, Syria.
Yeah, pause for a second, okay? So I just want you guys to know if you've ever taken a class on Islam, Sunni Islam and Shia Islam are totally different factions. Sunni Islam is aligned with Iran, okay, and also Lebanon. So it's in part regional, but it's also in part ideological. So when you hear Iran behind the scenes funneling money into the Palestinian territories for, all kinds of weaponry and stuff against Israel, or that Iran it's because Sunni Islam and its attitude towards Jews and Israel is much more contentious than what you also heard in recent years with the Abraham Accords, where largely the Shia Muslim communities, which are larger in number but are also more comprehensive, have struck deals with Israel, okay? An interesting piece is this thing about Lebanon. Do you guys know about Lebanon and the thing that happened? I'm going to skip it and save it for next week, okay? So keep on going.
Palestinian Arab citizens of Israel, the majority of them descended from Palestinians who remained in the country after the 1948 war, constitute about 1/5 of the Israeli population. Though they are typically identified as Arab Israelis to distinguish them from Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza, many of them strongly identify with the Palestinian people and consider the term Arab Israeli a misnomer. We are Palestinians by nationality, and we are Israeli citizens, Ahmad Tibi, an Arab member of the Israeli parliament, said in a 2019 interview. The relationship between Palestinian Israelis and the state is complex and often fraught, with many believing that the country discriminates against them in concrete ways. Still, surveys often show that a majority would prefer to remain Israeli citizens than accept citizenship in a future Palestinian state.
Okay, pause right there. So we'll have to continue to talk about this, and I want to tread delicately because I think it's not easy to hear what I perceive about this, but it's an important piece. Okay, that last sentence revealed something about the attitude of Palestinians and their relationship with, particularly with Israelis, but just sort of like the cultural attitude. There is an attitude of victimization. There is an attitude of marginalization, despite the sort of raw data that says there is representation, there is identity, and that those things are, really an important piece of how Palestinians are integrated into the society. I am not minimizing the fact that discrimination doesn't exist. I know for certain that it does. Okay, which by the way, it exists everywhere, and the fact that Israelis are discriminating against these people, we would say like it's a shame. Jews shouldn't be discriminating because Jews have been victims. We shouldn't discriminate anybody, and yet this is happening. So the question about what is the tenor or the quality of the discrimination that is existing, is it systemic? Is it ideological? Is it political? Like, discrimination is bad anywhere. I'm going to use a different word, bias, right? There are biases that exist between Israelis and Palestinians. There's something about the culture of Palestinians as a people that perceives the sort of, the perception of an inferior status as in some way the quality of victimhood. You will hear this statement there, and I'm going to bring this forward not because I believe it, but because I think it's educational. There is a perception that to say the Palestinians are either at your feet or they're at your throat. Maybe you've heard this before. It's not something that I believe in. I actually have to think about a better way to describe this, but this is the most succinct attitude that says that there's a quality of the sort of nationality that feels like it is either one of subservience or of aggression. It's not entirely true, but it's definitely part of the sort of identity that is being formed here. Let me pause because I might have said something inflammatory and I want to apologize if I did. Judy.
Is there a particular group of Israeli Jews that discriminate against Palestinians, like the Orthodox or whatever?
Absolutely. So one of the really contentious issues that you'll hear when you hear, by the way, I think I told you if you want to read this book, I read it. I thought it was a poorly written book. However, it was really good to sort of get the piece of it. It's called They Called Me a Lioness. And it's about this young woman who is a part of a family that really has become, pivotal in a lot of the uprising against the Israeli military in recent years. And she was arrested for slapping an Israeli soldier, and she became a heroine as a result, and sort of like used it to launch a political career, or at least like a public relations career. Nevertheless, in that moment, there is this question. One of the things that sort of prompts the resistance is the settlers' attitude towards the Palestinian residents. So the settlers believe that this is their land and that the Palestinians are intruders, and so they will use even sometimes violent and physical force. The fighting that happens, the sort of fight and retaliation and the cycle of violence that happens is largely due to some extremely they'll call themselves Zionistic. I think that's a misnomer. I think it's more like a militaristic attitude of some Israeli citizens that Palestinians are meant to be eradicated. That is a problem because that exists in Israeli society. Okay, did I answer your question? Yeah, Sherry, I saw your hand, or do you want?
The last sentence, why would a majority of Palestinians want to remain Israeli citizens and accept citizenship in a future state?
Yeah, so why would they, right? Take a look at the scenes, right? The surveys show that despite this, discrimination, why would they remain a member of a state that discriminates against them, right? Well, on the one hand, I would say, think about the Black communities in this country, right? They had rights of citizenship, but they were victims of a ton of civil rights abuses until the mid to late 20th century. And even in certain circumstances about the systemic racism that exists, the whole George Floyd protests. So why would the Black community want to remain citizens of a place that discriminates against them, right? Because it's better here than anywhere else. They don't have anywhere else to go because there's all kinds of reasons that go to it. And then on the other side, maybe the rights that are afforded are good, but they're just trying to correct the injustices that exist. And I think in that sense, there's a sense of heroism of that, right? Maybe the Palestinian message has an opportunity to soften the Israeli national identity, to broaden it, to make it better. That's an optimistic way to read it. Lori, you want to read a little bit?
Sure. Did Lori or Lauren?
I said Lori.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, Lauren. Next time.
That's okay.
I've highlighted so much, I forgot where we are. Oh, okay, got it. As
Bottom
of
of page
2019, right? As of
Yeah.
2019, about 5.6 million Palestinians were considered refugees by the United Nations because of their forebears displaced by wars with Israel. This figure is also a source of some controversy. The UN Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, the UN agency tasked with assisting Palestinian refugees, extends refugee status even to the descendants of Palestinians who personally fled homes in what is now Israel. The 1951 UN Convention on Refugees make no provision for the status of refugees to be passed on to descendants. Like many issues colored by the decades-long Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the emergence of a distinct Palestinian national identity is a matter of some dispute. Some
Audrey,
consider.
hold on a second, Audrey.
Yep.
That's exactly what we were talking about before, and we need to delve into that, right? So
Yes.
it's like refugee status is better than nothing, right? It's terrible, but that's kind of like how it is. All right, please go on.
Some consider an 1834 revolt against an Egyptian plan to draft young Palestinian men into the army and impose a head tax as a formative moment in the emergence of Palestinian national consciousness. But it's widely acknowledged that the rise of Zionism and the migration of significant number of Jews to territories then known as Palestine in the early 20th century profoundly shaped Palestinian identity, even if it didn't create it. Some right-wing Israeli figures have suggested that the dynamic undermines the legitimacy of Palestinian claims of nationhood and the corresponding drive to establish an independent Palestinian state. At times, they have also suggested that nothing separates Palestinians linguistically, religiously, or culturally from other Arab-speaking peoples, and that their national identity is largely constructed around opposition to Israel. Naturally, Palestinians, along with much of the world, reject this contention as baseless at best and racist at worst.
So pause for a second. Thank you very much, right? So here's a really interesting way to look at this, and just to hold on to this as well as we're putting together our definitions of us and them. So if you're a little bit more of a conservative, hawkish, right-wing Israeli, and you're saying, look, there's nothing that defines these people as a people. Why should they have their own national identity? They have nothing unique that relates to them, right? So now you have the world condemnation that says, no, that's a bunch of, that's not right. But then on the other hand, listen to what's being said. This is a little bit of Tishbe's argument as well. Okay, I'm not saying she's hawkish, but I'm saying that, like, basically you're trying to say, all right, in the argument, define yourself as a Palestinian. What makes you a Palestinian? And there is a part of it that is not easy to define without it having some kind of cultural, linguistic, its own language, its own spirituality, its own cultural or ethnic kind of ties and identities that make it unique to any other Arab country on the world. The only thing that you could say potentially attaches it to it is the land, right? And then you would say, what makes that attachment to that land unique? And you could argue nothing. You could argue nothing. In fact, that's why there's still so much tension. Because there are a lot of people that say there's nothing there. Even if, they've lived for generations, okay, that's great, but you have no unique tie to the land. The Jewish people have a very unique tie to land. We have thousands of years of history connected to the land. We have books that tell us that we're there. We have archaeology that proves that we were there. What do you have? That's an argument. Judy?
I think a lot of it, what figures into all of this is the fact that a lot of Palestinians wish all the Jews were dead. And
yeah.
So wait a minute, right? So first of all, I want to take away a lot, and I just want to insert that there is an attitude. There is an attitude among Palestinians that there's only one national identity in the land of Israel, and it is, if you will, a Palestinian identity. Nobody in the world agrees with that. Even our Arab neighbors. That's the way that it's been. You're right. You're right to point it out. Okay, that like I can't like there is a consciousness in the Palestinian identity that says our land was taken from us and we have a responsibility to return it to its former glory. And there's nothing in history that validates that.
That isn't that part of the whole constitution? Yeah, Palestinian Authority from the river to the sea.
Well, no, that's Hamas, right? Hamas, which was a at one point a very hardcore right wing political faction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but the Palestinian Authority may not necessarily sort of hold to that. And by the way, Audrey and all of us, and when we get to the political things, that there are people. So the behind closed doors conversations, nobody talks like this. Right, and we have privilege to the behind closed doors because they're meant to be shared, but they're not going to be on the public stage because I think it was I'm trying to remember who brought that up. Right, how come we don't see this in the news? Right, how come the news has always got it as us and them? Right, it's easier to distinguish the us and them than it is to talk about this nuance. Barbara, then Jay.
Going to play devil's advocate. This might really infuriate a lot of people, but I'm just going to pretend and just do this. I'm originally from New York.
No.
Now, I wasn't expelled from New York. I chose to leave New York, but part of me identifies very clearly as a New Yorker.
I couldn't get it anywhere in your mannerisms or anything. No, everybody's kind of shocked as I am that you came from New York. How could you possibly say this? But go ahead.
So I'm just saying, here I am in the land of California, and it's a lovely land to live in. And I'm not sure that I really want to go live back in the land of New York. The weather here is much nicer, although they have better water. So
pizza
and bagels.
Let's not go there. So but I'm saying that, like, if I put myself in that Palestinian headset, I can understand they feel a claim to a place. Now, whether it's legal, whether it's right, but I kind of get it. Now, of course, all these generations following, my children do not see themselves as New Yorkers. My grandchildren certainly don't. They just make fun of me. And they say, "How do you say coffee, Grandma?" And just so they can hear it. Isn't that funny? How do you say orange? But so they don't. I have that, and I don't know if anybody else feels that tug a little bit of the land of where you were born, of it's who you are. But I don't think that the next generations feel that.
Yeah.
Like I feel it.
I'm a Minnesotan. People ask me where I'm from, Minnesota.
Yeah.
A long time.
I don't think anybody found what you said as controversial. I think it was a beautiful example of what it is that we're talking about here, and how we need to be putting what it is becoming the coarsening of us and them. Like part of it is we need to have a them that's distinguished from us because we're afraid that the us that really is being created is going to take away a little bit of our own identity, right? And there's a fear in that. So that's an important piece to hold on to. Jay, and then I want to really see if we can get to the end. So if you will give me 5 more minutes, we'll get to the end of the article. Go ahead, Jay.
Rabbi, it sounded like you had a problem with the term "a lot of Palestinians" or "a lot of Arabs want this." I would say that if they could, a hell of a lot of Arabs or Muslims, Palestinians would want Israel erased from the face of the earth. If they could do it, I would say a lot of people would want that.
I think that there's emotion and then there's practicality, and that's why in that article it says that even though there's this feeling of discrimination, there's a desire to remain citizens because there is a sense that it's just like being a citizen of resident of the state of California versus New York, right? No, I mean really, like culturally, love New York, right? And there's stuff that's better than it, right? But do I want New York and LA? LA would cease to be LA. by the way, LA is like this wonderful mishmash of all kinds of like leftover people in the world. Israel is kind of like a mishmash of a bunch of leftover people in the world too. So anyways, I think that I think we have to really, all I'm trying to do, Jay, and I hope you'll sort of, expand your thought with me, is that the more that we can step away from a lot of them or the group or the totality of what it is, the better we are for moving forward, because it's important for us to acknowledge it's easy for us to go to all of those places and then discard the fact that there are a lot of people that don't do that. But if we can, don't feel that way. If we can broaden it, even if there is, if you will say, a significant minority of people that feel that way, even though that might be the case, that's not the totality of our conversation. The moment that we draw a conclusion on that is the moment that we lose. That would be my point. All right, so last few minutes, let's go to the end. Let's see. Pam, you want to read? Great. Top of the screen, bottom of page 12. Oh, it's not working. Try it again. You're muted.
Palestinians undeniably see themselves as possessing a unique national identity that confers on them the right to a national homeland, a position long endorsed by the international community. The 20th century was not kind to the Palestinians. Israel's 1948 War of Independence, which Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, or catastrophe, resulted in more than 700,000 Palestinians fleeing or being driven from their homes in what is now Israel, though whether the exodus was mostly flight or expulsion remains hotly disputed. Hundreds of Palestinian villages were also destroyed in the course of the fighting. A similar, though smaller, exodus occurred in the wake of the 1967 Six-Day War. The status of Palestinian refugees has long been one of the core issues at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Palestinian refugees have long claimed that international law guarantees them the right to return to their homes, citing UN General Assembly Resolution 194, adopted in December 1948, which states that refugees wishing to return to their homes and live at peace with their neighbors should be permitted to do so at the earliest practicable date. For its part, Israel largely considers this claim a non-starter, fearing that the return of millions of Palestinians is neither feasible nor just and would demographically overwhelm the country, erasing its Jewish character.
Okay, well, so there we go with our last statement, right? Which is a wonderful, this is a wonderful foray into our next week's conversation. So that is now sort of like moving into the sort of political dimensions. But once we understand who is an Israeli and who is a Palestinian, now we can understand sort of like where do we go from there, right? What does it mean for Israelis and Palestinians to coexist? And what does it mean if there's perhaps, some sort of like harmony? Is a one-state solution the answer, in which you have Palestinian and Israeli identities intermingled? Is it the two-state solution for two separate peoples? Is that the solution? So that's something that we're going to be talking about in next week's class. But you could see the underpinnings from the conversations here, that it's not just simply about identities of either people that existed before and came into contention, separated out, and they're just trying to figure out how to come back together. That's not it. It's actually, there's an evolution of Israeli identity, which we've discussed, and there's an evolution of Palestinian identity, which we've discussed. And I don't invalidate Palestinian identity developing a unique national character. I don't have any problem with them saying that they've created a national identity. And I would go so far as to venture, when we continue to study, that there are certain elements. If you go to Ramallah today and you study in the university, they're talking about Palestinian identity. They feel a tremendous sense of pride in the uniqueness of their identity in comparison to their Jordanian cousins, in comparison to their Syrian neighbors, in comparison to their Saudi Arabian long distance cousins. So there is something that is developing there. The question is, in the development of that, where does that fit in the context of the state of Israel? Is it a Jewish state? Is it an Israeli state with multiple national identities? this we have to continue to discuss. Any last comments? Hopefully you guys are, this was good. I actually this turned out better than I expected because I think these articles were really good. So read the articles, and it's so great to see you. I'm so happy we're learning together. So we're on next week for it's the 31st, right? It's the first. It's the first. It's All Hallows Eve, and what's the day?
Day of the Dead,
afterwards?
the Day of the Dead.
It's the Day of the Dead, but it's also something else. What do they call it? If the 31st is
All Saints Day.
All Saints Day, that's right. That's it. It's All Saints Day. Well, let's all raise up in saints and learn Torah together. That's good. All right, everybody, have a great week. Nice to see you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.